Good morning and welcome to the Point. Well, this week in Lansing, there was more discussion about roads. Michigan roads, most everyone agrees, are in bad shape. The State House was back in session for 2 short days. Republicans are still talking among themselves, trying to come up with a road solution. Now, the House has already passed a plan, and so has the Senate. But the two plans are very much different from one another. So now they're trying to see if there is some compromise. Later in this program, we'll talk with Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley about that very issue. He talks about the difficulty of getting 56, 20, and 1. That's the magic formula to get a bill passed. He'll also talk about what he thinks could happen and when it could happen. But first, we start our conversation with the Lieutenant Governor about an event that happened about a month ago, a tornado in his hometown of Portland, Michigan. He wasn't home at the time, but he certainly got there as quickly as he could, and he talks about what he saw and what's happened in his hometown since. I want to start with something that's not terribly political, but it is very impactful. I was in Portland earlier this week, and we're coming up almost a month since a tornado came through your hometown, and the destruction, the devastation, the damage is still very apparent. But let's go back and start with that. You got word that there was a tornado within blocks of your home, and you were quite a ways away. You were in the state, but you weren't close to Portland, were you?
That's right. I was speaking to a group up north at the time and heard about it, and so as I made my way back home that night, thankfully, just like everybody else in Portland, my family was safe. There wasn't any serious injuries as a result of the tornado, but the property damage was pretty extensive. And so it was something to really go through town at that point and to see how much had really happened. But what we saw after that was pretty remarkable, which was a community that didn't really want to wait for anybody to come in and help. I mean, they were just community crews, people coming in to help from all over the place. In fact, there were so many people coming to help, it was hard for the locals to manage all of the activity that was happening. But you saw improvement in terms of functionality of the city in very, very short order. So I was really proud of our citizens and the way they came together to make that happen. But we've got a lot of long-term work to do in order to restore the things that were completely destroyed.
You pointed out that everybody was okay, despite the fact there were some people trapped in a building for a while, which would be a scary experience. But still, psychologically, it has an impact. And part of the impact was, as you just pointed out, people came together and started working together. Overall, have people kind of calmed down? Not to suggest they were not calm, but I mean, it's got to be a little bit of a disquieting moment to know that this kind of a storm has come, and it came across most of the town.
It did. It went kind of diagonally across the entire town. And so disasters like that, sometimes they bring out the worst in people, or sometimes they bring out the best in people. And I think with our community, what it did is it brought people closer together. It did bring out the best in our people, and so longer term, I think it really leaves the community in a position to something really to build on, something to have confidence in the future about. So while the immediate aftermath and kind of the drama of that week following the tornado has definitely calmed substantially, that there is still the same level of determination to rebuild and to put it back better than it was before.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask about at least 3 churches that had significant damage to them, and we were talking just before we started. Some of those congregations are already making plans of at least a dedication to try to rebuild. That has to be good news for the community as well, I would think.
In a town like Portland, especially I would say in Portland, the community kind of revolves around its churches. And so it's very devastating to have 3 historic churches like that were badly damaged. One of them completely destroyed and had to come down. Another one substantially damaged, but looks like will be rebuilt. And then the other one that is well on its way to being rebuilt. And then there's another church that a lot of people don't realize, because from the front of it you can't tell it was damaged so badly, but it operates in an old strip mall. But it has grown to be a pretty good-sized church in Portland as well. And but that building could be saved also. So look with a lot of churches. I mean, the people that are members of that church just kind of roll up their sleeves and get to work, and so you see that type of progress happening. And I'm confident it won't stop until they're done.
The good news is, it's always bad news when a storm like that shows up. The good news is that most of that can be fixed. save the ones that have already been destroyed. Is the same true for roads? That may be a terrible segue, but as you came in and I was thinking today, well, of course we have to talk about roads. We've been talking about roads now. The governor's been talking about it for a number of years, but in a more serious legislative approach and or ballot approach, we've been doing it for over a year. So here we are again. It's summertime again, and there are two plans again. And I was in Lansing this week, and as an observer, and you certainly know more about it than I, as an observer, there's no plan that has 56 in the House, at least not today.
It's the problem of putting in place a long-term solution for our roads has been one that has been with us for a lot longer than just the length of the Snyder administration. It's really gone on for the last 15 years or so, the need to do something different so we have a better future for our roads. So there's the short-term things, like this year's budget, we put about $400 million of general fund into roads, but that's first of all, it's not as much as we need for the regular maintenance, but it's also, that's just a one-year thing. We've got to put something permanent in place. So, so as we see these plans move through, the House passed a plan, the Senate now passed a plan. You really need those steps to be taken before the real final negotiation can begin. Everybody has to put something on the table and prove they have the votes to get it through. Once that happens, then that final negotiation can happen. And so I'm confident that it's the process has moved along further than I would have expected at this point. And so I feel optimistic that there is a solution that is within grasp of the process that could get through the entire way, the House, the Senate, and the governor to agree on something. It's not an easy road. Obviously, it's been very difficult to get that type of consensus around it, but the ingredients are there to make it happen. So the negotiation is ongoing, and I'm hopeful that we'll see something happen yet this year.
As a member of the House of Representatives, you went through some very difficult times. You had to make some very difficult decisions, come up with compromises with the Democratic governor, and do things on a budget that was, in many ways, unmanageable. So you understand how difficult it can be to come to a consensus in the House. The difference is that Republicans are in charge of everything. And I hear from people, perhaps you do as well, that they want a solution and they find it hard to grasp. You just explain. I appreciate the difficulty, but for people who are not involved in the process, it seems a little difficult to understand why, with all of those votes that are controlled essentially by the same party, you can't come up with a way to fix roads. Does that just suggest the difficulty level of finding the right mix, or is it something more fundamental about a rift in a party that has some people that would be willing to raise revenues and others that say existing funds only?
There is a very wide diversity of opinion across both of the political parties. In fact, while you have the Republican Party and then you also have the Democrats that, you know, they operate under those labels, but there's a lot of diverse views within those two groups. And so with the coming to a solution on it, it's not a matter of here's what every single Republican thinks and here's what every single Democrat thinks. And so the solution is still one where it takes the assembly of 56 in the House, 20 in the Senate, and the governor to all agree on one solution. And if you were to try and think about just randomly, even right, what if you were to say just in the city of Grand Rapids, randomly pick 56 people, and then another 20 people, and then one more, and trying to get them all to agree on how to fix the roads, what you'd find it'd be very difficult, maybe even impossible. And so the fact that this system is producing plans out of each of the two chambers, and the governor, of course, working very positively and relentlessly toward a solution with both of those chambers, I think is a good sign that there's a solution within grasp. But it's not the political parties themselves. They both represent very diverse groups underneath their own tents. And that makes it take longer, but that's the type of government that we have. It takes a high degree of consensus to get things done. And so it's a little less efficient, a little more difficult to get to an answer, but when you get to one, it's one that that usually has been very, very well vetted and was able to achieve the type of consensus needed to get that number of votes.
I want to talk to you about something that's probably a little in the weeds for some folks, but I was fascinated by it. When the Senate got ready to pass their version that included a gas tax increase and a bunch of money that would be taken from existing pots and moved into a fund for roads, it was a difficult vote, and they were having trouble getting enough votes up there. There were a number of other side issues, and I'm not going to bother to go into all of those. At the end of the day, they got 19 votes. Takes 20. There's only one guy who can break a tie, and that's you. Right. Point is, about 80% of the chamber didn't know that you were just on the other side of the wall. You kind of materialized out of nowhere. For people watching, the lieutenant governor's office is on the same floor directly behind the Senate chamber. And you came out to cast that deciding vote. That must have taken a little coordination, because there were a lot of folks who didn't even know you were in the building.
Yeah, and there was a belief among many that there were 20 votes, and so it wasn't necessary for me to be there. I wasn't scheduled originally, and so I decided to be in town that day, to be available just in my office and work from that location, to be available. I don't believe that it was understood that there were only 19 votes until the vote was actually on the board and the board closed. And so seeing that happen, of course, I went to the rostrum to perform that duty. As you had mentioned, Lieutenant Governor is the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, and it did help to move the process along. Had that particular vote failed, then probably the next step would have been to go back and renegotiate a deal with a different looking coalition. For those who didn't want to see higher taxes, the Senate was about $800 million. That's 60% less than Proposal 1. So it kind of, by passing, it kind of bookended the revenue discussion, the tax discussion, at a much lower level than what the Proposal 1 generated. That vote failed, then everything's back on the table, and so moving the process forward was a pretty important aspect to finding a solution to a long-term solution to our roads issues.
I asked Senator Ananick within 45 minutes or so after that vote was taken. I said, look, if he is the Senate Democratic leader, and he is not particularly fond of the bill that passed out of the Senate, and I said, well, if you didn't like it, you could have held one of your votes back. And again, this is a procedural matter, but by holding a vote back, there's no tie. You can't vote if there's no tie. But they didn't do that, and he explained, and I take him at his word, that that's not how he wanted to perform. That wasn't the thing that he wanted to do. But if Democrats wanted to stop this, they could have by simply not voting, right?
There is procedurally, if there's no tie, then there is no ability for the lieutenant governor to vote. So that is always a strategy that somebody could employ. Although most senators would not view that as a viable option, because it is their job to vote on bills that are put before the Senate. And so to withhold a vote to have a procedural advantage would really be a violation of that public trust. What they're there for, which is to vote yes or no on these bills on behalf of what they think is best for their constituents.
So as we move towards the end time of July into early August, the legislature doesn't have a lot of days scheduled. They are scheduled to come back one day next week over in the House. We are now looking at a solution that will certainly be in the fall. Is that your assessment?
Throughout the summer, there are a lot of people that are working on it at the leadership level in the House and the Senate and the governor. The House Democrats actually put something forward as well, and so that those discussions and negotiations are happening throughout the summer. If there were some sort of a deal reached, a consensus reached before September, then it wouldn't surprise me to see there to be an effort to to bring people back. But I don't believe that there'll be plans made for people to come and hold a vote ahead of some sort of an agreement reached, at least at the leadership level. So I think it's more likely that it be a September type of a time frame, or October when you're talking about a real deal come together. But I also wouldn't rule out it happening earlier than that. But the thing to keep in mind, though, is the budget that we put in place right now. It did put $400 million into roads. That is roughly the same amount that Proposal 1 would have supplied to roads in that same time period. So when we talk about this solution, it's not for the construction season that we're in right now. This current budget put the general fund resources there in order to get us by one more year. And so as we find a permanent solution, it's more likely that be one that starts to impact things in the budget next.
I don't want to stay on this any longer, but I do want to ask this. You are familiar, obviously, with both plans, the plan out of the House and the plan out of the Senate. The revenues included in the Senate plan mean that less of the current general fund money has to be moved, but still a significant amount would have to be shifted over. You're a budget guy. You know pretty much how it works. Is that doable? Is that sustainable over a long term?
Well, anything is possible. It's just a matter of whether or not it's the same question. Do you have the votes in the Senate and in the House and in an agreement with the governor in order to make those types of changes? So the House, roughly speaking, the House was a 90% new revenues, taxes, or 10% new revenues, taxes, 90% cuts or redirection of current revenues. In the Senate, it was about a 50-50 plan. So both require very substantial redirection of current resources from things that are being spent on today to things that over to roads. What we are asking for as the administration is that we really nail down, when this goes into place, we have an understanding between all of us. If we're going to make substantial cuts or we're going to redirect revenues that are currently going in one place to roads, we need to say now or decide now how we're going to accommodate that in the budget, because we have worked very hard to establish a balanced budget in this state. In fact, it's a matter of routine passing budgets where it used to be drama and the government shutdowns and everything else. It's a matter of routine for us today to pass balanced budgets that save for the future and take care of our long-term obligations in terms of debt. We don't want to sacrifice that for a road solution. We want to maintain that and put a road solution in place.
As for roads, when or if something happens is really anybody's guess. You heard the Lieutenant Governor say that he thinks it could happen this fall, maybe sooner, but most observers believe it will be at least fall. And even then, there's still no guarantee you'll get to that magic formula of 56, 20, and 1. But of course, we'll be there watching, and we'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. Welcome back to the Point. Our guest this morning is Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley. As we talked about in the last segment, the Lieutenant Governor once was in the House of Representatives and now is the number 2 in the Snyder administration. He wears a number of hats, including those that are investigative. In other words, looking into issues that may be of importance to people here in the state of Michigan. One such issue is about prescription drugs, and particularly the abuse of those drugs. We talked with the Lieutenant Governor about that. Let's talk about prescription drugs and a drug task force that you are very instrumental in. I find this interesting because as we look at study after study, when we hear from law enforcement and other people, one of the biggest drug problems that we have, not that it doesn't exist, but it's not necessarily the street drugs, but it is prescription drugs that find their way to the street. I mean, that is kind of the new norm, and that's something that you're looking into along with others.
This has become a growing problem, and we can even see those new folks that are addicted to heroin, those new cases of folks addicted to heroin. We're finding it as much as maybe half of those cases started the addiction on prescription drugs. And so this is a really big problem. And the person that we're talking about, sometimes you have in your mind those that are addicted to drugs, like it's like you have your picture in mind and who that is. I can tell you that it's very, very different than that. We're talking about just regular people that are out there living their lives, and they had something go wrong health-wise, and they were put on pain medication to manage that, and then developed an addiction. And so we need to figure out a better way to deal with that problem, because today it's directing people into lifelong addiction and in some case going to very, very dangerous street drugs that can come with other types of issues. In Indianapolis, they actually had an outbreak of HIV because of these issues and drug addiction, and that's something we don't want to ever see, obviously, happen here. And so we need to look at a comprehensive solution, that everything from the licensing and regulatory actions that are involved around prescribing and dispensing drugs, but then what do we do when somebody becomes addicted? How do we help them to get off that addiction and to be supportive and successful in doing that? So that's really the aim of the task force, is to try and get better outcomes for people. We still want to manage pain effectively when people have healthcare problems, but we don't want them to develop other lifelong chronic illnesses such as addiction and permanent brain chemistry differences. We want them to be healed fully, and that includes living a life free of addiction from drugs.
One of the things that other states have done is that they have established a database, so they know, for example, if I have gone to a doctor and been prescribed one of these heavy pain medications, and then if I go to another doctor shopping, and try to get another prescription, they could check that database and say, wait a minute, you already have a prescription, you don't need another one. I understand in Michigan we don't have that. Is that something that you will look at?
We actually do have it in Michigan, but there's not mandatory reporting required. And so what we see is that there's a minority of physicians that, when they write a prescription, report to the system. And it is a secure database, but then other doctors can look and see, okay, this person that has come in for a prescription and wants one of these heavily addictive pain medications, well, what has the history been for that individual? And so that is one of the items from a regulatory standpoint, I think, that we'll look very closely at, particularly as we've seen other states move to that type of a model to say when a prescription is given, there must be a reporting of that prescription in a way that we can stop the process of the doctor shopping, or stop the process of having multiple prescriptions filled, because it's, a lot of times it's for diversion purposes. It might not even be that the person themselves are addicted, but but those pills get diverted to the street. And but then there's other things too that are innocent diversion, like, for example, how many people have pain medication from an old surgery that's sitting in their medicine cabinet. And so if you have a family member maybe that has developed an addiction, that we have to get better at, as a society, we have to have better options and get better at disposing of unused prescriptions, particularly those that have addiction qualities.
Well, and part of the problem with the scenario you just set out is that if it's an old prescription and you aren't currently taking it and it's shoved in the back of a medicine cabinet, they can disappear and you won't even know they're gone. And that we do see that sort of thing happening. In fact, unfortunately, it is common for drugs to be diverted when the person that was the original owner of those drugs wouldn't have even known, because maybe it was just a couple of pills, maybe it was half of them, maybe it was a whole thing, but it was old enough to where they never even remembered that they had it. And so that one thing really to encourage people to do is to go through and look through their cabinet and see, do you have any of these types of drugs laying around, and make sure they get properly disposed. Our time with the Lieutenant Governor ran out before we had an opportunity to talk to him about another initiative as he goes around the state. He's talking with people who have children in special education courses, trying to find out what kind of service is delivered, how it's delivered, and how it can be improved. He'll be back to talk with us about that on an upcoming program. And we'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. So, how long have we been talking about crumbling roads here in Michigan? Certainly as long as I can remember. A number of governors have looked at the problem. Some have come up with at least partial solutions. Now it's up to this legislature, this governor, to try to figure out what to do next. As you heard on this morning's program, there are a number of different plans, but not one that can yet get to that final solution. We'll keep watching. Hope you will too, every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock right here on To the Point.